everybody. So I am here with Lauren, who is Little Miss Funeral, and with Joelle, the grave woman. We're going to just have a kind of honest discussion about the funeral business, but typically we're discussing all the positives, all the good, but I want to have a little honest discussion about some of the scandal and the bad things that do happen within the business. Like every business, there's bad people. And sometimes they make it into the media, and sometimes the media spins it the way they want it to be spun. So I just want to bring up a couple specific scandals, I guess you could say, that were in the news, and discuss how maybe they've been portrayed incorrectly, or maybe how does a funeral home get to that point that they're doing some of these things, and maybe things that each of the ladies know from in their kind of area as well that have been brought up. So when I talk about scandal, what do you guys first comes to your mind within the business?
I'll start real quick because I think that the one that comes to my mind is something that a lot of people watching this may be familiar with because it was very much out there on social media, and it was the funeral home who had the veteran in their care, and the family posted a video of the veteran on a stretcher, and I think they had the American flag just draped over them. And this picture basically went viral, and people were saying, how dare this funeral home treat a veteran this way? It's not giving them proper dignity and respect and honor for everything that they've done. And it kind of blew up, and a lot of it was bashing the funeral home for the care that they gave to this particular individual. And looking at the picture, with no background information, looking at the picture, you would think, who in their right mind would ever do this? Who would have somebody viewed on a stretcher with the American flag just tossed on top of them, and invite people into the funeral home to see them? So that was almost my first initial response. But then as a funeral director, I also took a step back and I was like, well, we don't know what is going on behind the scenes. We don't know, is this a private viewing? There are so many different factors that could have went into play, but that was a huge negative for the funeral industry that I remember from not too long ago.
I think the thing that comes to mind, two of them come to mind. I'm from South Carolina, and there was this story about a man who was like 6'4" or something, and the funeral home didn't have a casket big enough to put, or long enough to put him in, so they cut his legs off. And I'm not sure how the family found out about it, but it was a huge story. And of course, we both know that, or we all know that is like completely unacceptable. And I don't know what this funeral home had done before that they got away with, but in order to just cut someone's legs off, that tells me that you're way too comfortable with doing the wrong thing. Another instance that comes to mind is the crematory that was here in Georgia that wasn't cremating the bodies that they were receiving from funeral homes and sending back dirt and ashes from the retort, continuously to funeral homes. And then they found all these bodies on the property. And then another one that comes to mind is the story out of Florida where the funeral home had all the bodies sitting in the hearse, sitting outside, and sitting out, just everywhere, and was, creating putrid smells in the neighborhood and everything. And then more recently in Detroit, where they found all the kids in the attic that had been embalmed. And when I hear stories like that, it's just extremely disappointing and, almost enraging.
I was going to say about the kids then that were found. I remember that story coming about too. I think anytime that there's children or babies or kids involved and neglect is being given to them within the funeral industry, I think those are the things that hit the hardest for funeral professionals who really do care about what they do.
Well, and I think it makes the better news story as well. That's something to look at with all of them. If it wasn't children, would it have been as big of a story? If it hadn't been a veteran in that instance with, being on the cot, would it have been as big a story? So it's turning a story and spinning it, as the media does, in different directions. I know that with the baby story in Detroit, they also brought up, they found all these cremated remains. That to me was when I knew I couldn't believe I shouldn't believe the whole story. because they were trying to put a negative spin on a situation that part of it wasn't negative, but they were just adding in. Every funeral home, 99% of the funeral homes out there, which most people don't realize, have cremated remains stored in them because people abandon cremated remains. They never come back from their loved one. The funeral home can't just throw them out or bury them. That's more cost for the funeral home that they're putting out if they go bury somebody. I know some funeral homes will do mass burials or cemeteries will donate now, but funeral homes have masses sometimes of cremated remains that people have never picked up. And that's not illegal. So that part of it, without knowing more to that story, I'm like, okay, that part I don't care about, but it sounds really bad. Oh, we found 200 sets of cremated remains in the funeral home. It's normal, that you would find that. But the fact that they spun it, like you said, that gentleman down in, I'll have to see where that guy was. That was on the cot. We don't know if that was a private family. And I feel like I've got to see what resolve came of that, because I remember there was a financial situation to that the family came back and said, okay, we don't want to do viewing in something and we're going to just have him on the cot. And the family chose that. And it was like an extended family member who then got upset because he was on a cot and he wasn't in a casket. Like, it was, the family knew, but the extended family didn't know. So it creates then this big, huge thing.
A similar situation like that happened to me not very long ago, where I had a family come in to the funeral home for a private viewing. It was not in any sort of newspaper. It was not put on any sort of website. It was only for the immediate family. The immediate family then decided to extend the invitation to other members of their family to come into the funeral home. So the person that we had in our care was not in a casket because they were going to be having what we call a direct cremation, where the family didn't want to buy a casket. There was no law. There's no reason for them to have that financial burden on top of everything else if there's no public viewing. And we got a letter from an extended family member basically bashing us for laying out a person for a visitation, and they never saw a wake where there were no flowers, and this whole letter. And I actually had to reach out to them and I explained the situation, and then they actually came by and apologized to us because they did not know the backstory. They were walking into the funeral home and they thought they were walking into a traditional wake. The immediate family who invited them never told them what they were going to be walking into. And I guess as the funeral director, maybe I was naive and not prepared myself when these people were walking into the funeral home to not let them know what they were going to be saying, because I had told the immediate family of the deceased exactly what they were going to be saying, but I didn't tell every single person walking into the funeral home that too. So things like that happen all the time, and all it is miscommunication, but it can get spun out of control.
Well, and it can get put back on the funeral home as if we chose and we were neglecting, like you said. That's families who want to have an unembalmed viewing before cremation, and it's maybe like an identification time viewing, but then, like you said, well, a few more people get invited and they walk in and the person is not embalmed, they're not prepared, they're in a hospital gown, but they're covered with a quilt or whatever it may be. But if somebody has never seen for a viewing time someone who's not embalmed, their coloring is different. They might be a little purple or blotchy, or, their lips are dried out a little more. They're just not presented the same way as an embalmed person, because we control the coloring that way and we control so much more. And that reflects then on us as a funeral home. And that's with families, I'll explain, okay, who's coming to this time? Oh, so-and-so and so-and-so. Do they understand that this person is not embalmed, that they maybe had an autopsy and we're closing up their cranium, and that may be shown because they're not going to be kind of buried down in a casket. They're going to be up on a table. So you're going to see that more. And like, do they know that? And making sure people, like you said, making sure they understand, because that then reflects back on us. And then that's when people take pictures and start posting and calling the media and spinning it out of control. And
do you guys have any type of cell phone policies at your funeral home? Because lately what we've been doing is putting up a sign that says, basically, at the request of the family, we ask that no photos or videos are taken for this very reason. And then partially because some families, especially older families, feel as if it's very disrespectful to walk up to the casket and start taking selfies. And that's something that I see. I don't know whether I'm irritated by it or whether it's just foreign to me. Like, why would you want to take a selfie with a deceased individual? How do you guys feel about that?
Funeral photography actually dates back to like Victorian ages, but I think funeral photography in itself was like an art form. I remember growing up as a little girl, and when my grandparents passed away, going through photo albums that they had, and we're of Polish heritage. And what would happen is, like, when my great aunts, great uncles, and older family members that I wasn't alive for had passed away, my family from Poland wouldn't be able to make it over here to the US to see them. So family members would take a picture of the casket to send to the family members who were still in Poland. And when we were going through these photo albums, we saw these photos that they had, but they were done in a very respectful way. It was not necessarily an up close picture of the deceased's face. It was, a scaled back. There's the casket, there they are, there are the flowers. It was almost like a whole room picture. So I think that funeral photography can be a very beautiful thing. In today's day and age, with social media and just the world that we're living in now, selfies obviously are a huge thing. And I think that there's a fine line. If maybe you want to take a picture for yourself and for your own grief process to help you remember the person and whatnot, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. But to take a picture of yourself with the deceased and then post it to social media, whether or not you're looking for likes, comments, that like wow factor, I think that's when you're stepping over that line, because you have to remember that this is a person, they do demand respect. And then when you're dealing with posting pictures of the deceased online, since they are dead, they have no voice to speak of if they would want that picture there. So you're almost stepping into sacred ground, in my opinion, and overstepping that boundary with that.
I agree 100%, because I can remember being a little girl and there was a photo of my great great grandfather in his casket with the flowers and everything on the family piano. And of course, being morbidly curious, it was one of my favorite photos to look at. But I just think that, like you were saying, there's such a thin line. And I think a lot of it now is done not as an art, but just for shock value. To say, oh, I saw a dead body today, which I think, plays into the whole people not talking about death. So death being like a spectacle thing. But I'm interested to hear what Kari has to say.
I see this from 3 different points that I want to just make a quick comments on. The first is, the funeral photography there's now companies, there's some beautiful Instagram accounts that are from funeral photographers that do almost like at a wedding videography and funeral, and they kind of capture the whole day. And I felt like when I was in England, that's kind of what I felt like I was doing, because I was just kind of along for the ride of the funeral that we went on. And I got to take all these beautiful pictures that I'm hoping the family will be thankful to have as a keepsake from that day, and like video of that day and stuff. And so it was kind of like I was this voyeur in this moment that this family was having. And it was kind of a different observation for me than running the funeral. I was observing it, and it was kind of a cool thing. So I can see where people would like to see that in that beautiful kind of form. But I didn't ever photograph the body. I didn't ever photograph the deceased. So I think that is the biggest difference is, as people going to funerals, there's one thing about taking a picture of, oh, here we're at the cemetery and it's so pretty, and sharing that, than going up and taking a picture of the deceased because you want to share it because you want attention for something. Or like I see teenagers doing this, like, oh, I'm here at, Bobby's funeral and he got shot or whatever, he died in a car accident, I lost my homie, or I lost my friend, or I lost my teammate, or whatever it is. And that's not about the deceased. That's about you. That to me is absolutely not acceptable. You know, I found a picture the other day though. I was going through pictures and it's at my grandma's funeral, and my daughter was 1.5 years and I was pregnant at the time. I was like, I don't know, 2 months pregnant with my youngest. That's the only picture of the 3 of us technically, or of the 4 of us that will ever exist in a space. And I'm holding my older daughter up. She's looking at her grandma or her great grandma, and I'm pregnant. And I'm like, I'm glad I have that photo, but that's my grandma. That's my moment. I'm not sharing it. I'm not projecting it. Like, it's just for me. And it's funny when families would bring in pictures for videos and going through the photo albums, and they have pictures of all their other people at the funeral home. And it's like, huh, back in 1972, we had the same carpet. We might need to change that, you know, kind of thing. But where I see this photography, really the downside is, as funeral professionals, overstepping and taking photos in the prep room where there's feet in the background, markers in the background, bodies that are covered, taking pictures driving hearses where there's caskets in the background, taking pictures of setups at the funeral home or at church and sharing them, even if they're cool and they're beautiful and you're trying to just share maybe with other professionals in like Facebook groups. There's still a deceased in that picture. That's not your loved one. It's not your moment to share. And that's one thing I say to mortuary school students. That's not your moment. You're there as a hired professional. You have never been given the privilege to take the picture, to share it, or the right to, unless you have asked the family and they've said, yes, you can share this. That's not your moment. It's nothing to do with you. You've been hired to be there. You're not there as a guest. And that to me is a big difference. And there has been, you know, some lawsuits we've seen within our business that people have posted to their personal Instagram, like, hey, I'm driving the hearse, and somebody's loved one's in the back, and the family has sued because they did not give authorization for that to happen. And so I think that has really changed within our industry, that's becoming a lesson you have to learn and kind of be aware of on your staff. But I think that's also, you know, ownership and stuff and what you allow your employees to do. And if you monitor that with your employees. But I really like the hanging a sign that the family, you know, no cell phones, no whatever you do. That's, you know, you see that at weddings now. Don't, because people step in front of photographers that have been hired so they can get a better picture, and they block the photographer who needs to be taking the picture. And so they say, don't be taking cell phone pictures because that's not, or they publish, you know, people, bride and grooms are worried that you're going to take a photo and publish it to Facebook before they're allowed to share pictures of the moment and of the day. So it's kind of like owning the moment as yours rather than your guests at events getting to share it. Or have you seen people post pictures of babies that before the parents even post the picture of the baby? It's like,
that was a huge thing with me because nobody knew I was pregnant. So
yeah.
when we gave birth to our baby, I told like all the in-laws, you know, my parents and my in-laws, I was like, nobody's posting any pictures of the baby until we post a picture of the baby. And thankfully we have an amazing family who respected that, but not everybody has family that respect that. So.
And also with the sign, it was also intended for our protection as well, because a lot of the times we'll be standing at the head of the casket and someone comes and wants to shoot a photo, and you're in the picture doing, or we're in the picture doing our job, and I don't necessarily want you to take my picture. I mean, it sounds kind of vain, but I don't need to be photographed. You're, like you were saying, you're not here for me. You're here for the deceased.
So tell me, out of all the scandals and things you've heard in the media, what are 2 that to you have been the most, I guess, hurtful as a funeral professional that somebody else has done these things? I know we talked about cutting off legs and leaving bodies to rot. I think those are some of the things. What are some other things that just have really hit home that you just hope the person burns for, because it's just unacceptable and it really put a bad rap on you as being part of the business?
That's what came to mind initially, was anything involving necrophilia or any type of mutilation beyond what is required for, you know, embalming or just any type of extreme mutilation to the body. I overheard a conversation while in mortuary school that aspiration was a great stress reliever. And that disgusted me. And then they went on to say how sometimes when they're aspirating, holes will be poked in the sides of the deceased because they're doing it that hard. To me, that's utterly disgusting.
I agree with that, because embalming should be looked at as an art form. It should be looked at as a sacred thing that funeral professionals have the honor to do with the family's permission in order to give a person back to their family in a better state than they passed away in. So anytime any sort of body work is done, it should be done with the utmost respect and aspiration. Yes, there is a physical element to it that funeral directors have to do in order to properly aspirate a person and get the fluids out and make certain that organs are being punctured that have to be punctured. And I know that might not be a beautiful word, but it's the truth behind it. There's a job that we have to do, but you can do it in a respectful way. Just because you're pissed off that somebody cut you off in the morning on the way to work doesn't mean that you have to take out that frustration on the person that's in front of you, because that is still a person that's in front of you.
When we are given somebody to care for, there's nobody there protecting them with us or with the funeral director or embalmer. Like, they are completely helpless. That body is, and it's still a person, even if it's a shell of somebody. And so to trust your most prized possession, basically your loved one, with somebody else, and they harm them, they take advantage of them, they cut them, they break them. I know I've heard funeral directors talk about breaking bones to get somebody dressed or to fit them in a casket or something. It's illegal. There are laws against desecration of a body, and that is what that is. So it's one of those, if we know somebody, we have to report it. But then there's those that don't want to get involved and don't want to make it a big deal, or they don't want to be a whistleblower. So there's that as well that goes on within the business, that you might know somebody who does something, but it's hard to get it reported. And down the lines, I know that I knew of a place that was functioning without a licensed director at it. There was no manager, there was no licensed, and I called the state to try and report it. And they told me that I had to just print off the page from the website, fill it out, mail it in, and then maybe they would look into it. And I'm like, but I'm telling you this is happening, and instead of you reacting quickly, you want a 2-week process to happen. So every family they're serving during that 2 weeks are being cared for by unlicensed people, and you're okay with that. And that is part of the problem, I think, is there's not enough people, just like every area, there's not enough people overseeing or who can look into all these accusations with all these funeral homes and all these situations. And it's really, really sad that that's the case. To me, one other area we haven't even touched on is financial. The financial is one that hits the media as well. And that's where most people get caught, is misappropriation of funds, where people have pre-funded and they go to, then the funeral home is actually keeping the money rather than investing it in the third party that they're supposed to. Then when it comes time, there's no money there to bury the individual, because the funeral home's been shut down and they've been arrested, and those funds are gone. That is when I felt really helpless, is when families come and say, that was all the money I had. That's all the money my mom had. We now have no money to bury my mom. So what do you want me to do? So what are stories you guys have heard of that, and how do you see that happens? So
working in insurance, I've seen that happen countless times. And like you said, it's just a horrible feeling. It's a level of helplessness and then infuriation, because someone has taken advantage of, and most of the time it's the elderly, because they're the ones that are making prearrangements in most cases. But I know here in Georgia, you're not supposed to take money directly from a family. It's either supposed to go into a trust or into an insurance policy. So the insurance industry is a lot more regulated than the funeral industry, but still, I I know of funeral homes that take monies from families. I mean, and I don't know whether it's because the consumer is not aware of the laws or whether because it's the funeral home that's taking advantage of the consumer. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. That's why I think it's so important for consumers to educate themselves, know the laws, ask questions, and I wish there were more advocates for consumers in the funeral industry as far as finances are concerned.
And the thing that's difficult about finances is every single state has different regulations and different laws that is set into place to protect people. So what is legal in New York may not be legal in Michigan or legal in Georgia, and so on and so forth. So from it is important for families to educate themselves, because watching one video that we're talking about may not apply to what they're saying in their state. And I think that sometimes these issues come into people are walking into a funeral home and they just have trust for the person that's sitting in front of them. So they see a funeral director sitting in front of them. They're in a nice suit. They're in this nice building. The building has probably been there for generations serving the community. And the person is going to believe what that funeral professional is telling them. So if they say, oh, yes, Mrs. Smith, you can give us your money and we're going to set it aside. And then, when the time comes, it'll be there to have your funeral arrangements. Mrs. Smith is going to walk out being, oh, everything's all in place. Where really those laws, the funeral professional may not be telling them, well, legally, if we're taking your money, we do have to deposit it into a trust account. You have to get paperwork within 10 business days proving that we submitted this paperwork to you. So miscommunication and blind trust for the person that's in front of them, I think, is really the main concern with what is causing all of these issues.
Well, and I think where it starts, because there is a time period, at least in many states, that the funeral home can hold the funds before they then turn them into the insurance or into a trust. So you can, it can be given to the funeral home and them hold it for a certain period and before it's actually sent to the trust or to an insurance. The checks should be made out to a third party. It not always is, but sometimes that's done because, oh, mom may not last a week. But we want to get this pre-funding done, and then mom lasts, 6 months or whatever. And so then that money, the funeral home never turned it over. And so it sits in the funeral home's bank account. And I think that's where some of these funeral homes, it starts where, oh, we're going to take in this money from this person. Oh, I have an extra 10,000 in my bank account this month. That's great. Well, next month I'll put it in the account. And then they do it once and then twice. And they have this cash flow that you get addicted to almost. It's kind of like gambling. Will I have it? Will I not have it? Will there be enough? Will there not be enough? And then I think it snowballs and you get yourself in so deep you can't get out. And eventually maybe you get caught then because the family comes in and then the money's not there. And I think some of these funeral directors think, oh, when they do die, we just will pay for it out of our own pocket, out of our own account, and nobody will ever know the difference. But then once you get in so deep and there's no cash flow, you don't have the money in the bank, there's nothing to pay for, Betty's funeral when she does die, and it all explodes. And I feel like that's really where that all happens. None of that is an excuse, but I can see how it happens now. It's the greed, it's money, it's an evil devil-made thing that controls us, and it just snowballs down, unfortunately, into a bad thing, and then people get screwed in the end, which is so horrible. Especially, like you said, it's the elderly that get the most taken advantage of by it.
It's funny that you were saying about that snowball effect too, because a couple of years back, I, for my continuing education in New York State, I actually went to like an ethics class, and the gentleman who was talking was actually arrested and did jail time. I believe he was a financial advisor because he was borrowing money from Peter to pay Paul. And it started out just like you said, oh, I'm in a tough spot, so I'm just going to transfer money to cover myself, but then I'm going to transfer it right back. And that's what he did. But then that came up again. So he goes, well, it worked one time, so I'm going to do it again. so he did, and he got comfortable in that notion, and that's how he ended up getting caught, getting arrested. And he talks about the ethics that's behind it. And I feel like, unfortunately, it's not necessarily in that scenario that you're dealing with bad people. You're just dealing with people who are making a bad choice. And I think that can happen a lot with smaller funeral homes. And I love small funeral homes. I love family run funeral homes, but the funeral industry is a very unpredictable business. You're not always having cash flow come in, and the bills are always still going to be due. So I'm not, once again, saying that it's small family funeral homes who are stealing your money and they're people who should not be trusted. But what I'm saying is that it's an unfortunate thing that good people sometimes are just making these bad choices that are affecting innocent people who are trusting them.
Thank you guys for sharing your thoughts on the scandals and kind of some of the talk that's within our industry. And we can see how one problem may need to lead to the other. You know, when a funeral home runs into the financial because they've been taking money and then run out of money, then they don't have money to pay the crematory, maybe to pay the cemetery. So they then stash a body and the body rots, and then down the rabbit hole they go. And it's one problem leads to the next problem, which leads to the next problem. And I think that's where a lot of these funeral homes have gotten in trouble and eventually gotten caught, which is wonderful. But if you think anything illegal is happening at a funeral home near you, report it. Call your state officials, call the health department, call somebody and let them know so it can be looked into. Rather than talk about it behind the scenes or calling the media, report it and start a conversation, ask a question, know the truth rather than spread something that you don't know is the truth. So other families are not taken advantage of. Other families are treated honestly and respectfully, especially if you think something bad's going on. Make sure you report it. Thank you to Joelle and Lauren for joining me for an honest discussion about the funeral business and some of the things that do go bad behind the scenes for some naughty individuals. Appreciate you guys. Head over to The Grave Woman, check out her content on YouTube, and head over to Lauren's channel, Little Miss Funeral, to check out her content. Like, subscribe, share a video with somebody, get the information out there. So thanks, guys.